Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am most pleased to welcome you to a 2-week series on a review of a book. We get a lot of feedback from our viewers, and this is one of the things that you very much like, is us picking certain books and reviewing them, and the author is with us today. Our guest today has a really fascinating background. We welcome to the program Karen Wright. Our guest was born in the state of Washington, and she was raised in Yakima Valley, and she graduated from Washington State University with a baccalaureate degree and a teaching credentials in English and art. And following that, she taught at the junior high school level for some years, but she went on a journey. Our guest has been on many journeys. In 1984, she moved to San Francisco, and she worked as a TV news reporter for an independent television station, but she did other things, including marketing director for a film company producing documentaries and commercials, as well as a personal shopper employed at Nordstrom's. Then she moved to Los Angeles, and she became a corporate leadership trainer. That's what her book's about, is experiencing in life and changing and not being fearful of change. Again, I want to introduce the book, and they will show on the screen the cover of the book. It is titled Sequoia Seed, and you see it there, and it's available. And later in the program, we'll talk to you about how to contact our guest, Karen Wright. Karen and I have read the book, and I thank you for taking time to be with us with your time, and you're generous to do so, and congratulations on its publication.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is a visiting panel member and a former guest on the show who's also an author, and I certainly love her works, Patty Dickinson. Patty, thank you for being here, and we'll start the questioning with Janelle.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. As Tony indicated, you've lived such a fascinating life. Now you're a writer. Were you always interested in writing? And tell us how you came to be a writer.
You know, I think I used writing as a friend all throughout my childhood and growing up. And even though once my journal got discovered by my mother, and that was not a pleasant experience, I continued to write. And it was a way for me to kind of get my thoughts down on paper and see them in a little different light. So I didn't publish anything until now other than my journals, but I do have boxes of those.
And so you've done a lot of writing over your lifetime in spurts. Yeah. Did you write in spurts?
I wrote in spurts, and interestingly enough, I wrote mostly when I didn't feel very good, you know, when life didn't seem to be going very well.
And how did you come up with the idea for the Sequoia Seed?
Well, the Sequoia Seed began as individual writings. The chapters still pretty much are standalone chapters. But it began as writings that I did for my international readership of an online e-zine that I've been doing for the last 6 years. And one of my subscribers wrote to me at one point. I used to publish that weekly, and one of them wrote and said, "My computer's full, put it together in a book." And I went, why don't I put it together in a book? That's got to be a really easy thing to do. And as Patty will attest, that's, you know, the last thing in the world a writer ever says is that it was an easy thing to do.
Thank you.
Patty?
It's not an easy thing to do, and you don't do it for money. Is that right?
Not so far.
No. Well, congratulations.
Thank you,
because
Patty.
I've known you for a while, and I remember when this book was in the thinking stage, and I am interested in the fact that these are standalone chapters. That's very that makes it very readable. And how did that happen, and are you pleased with that?
Well, I am pleased with it. There was a period of time where I thought that was going to be a problem. And when I hired an editor who took me through the process of really writing a book and not just compiling chapters, she told me at one point, she said, you know, these are all standalone, and you're going to need to find a way to put them together in a flow of some kind. So that the reader will end one chapter and want to move into the next chapter. And I thought that was going to be a very difficult thing to do, but she gave me an exercise that allowed me to take the 23 chapters that are there and see if there was some kind of sequence that they could be put into. And interestingly enough, I had it done in an hour and a half, and I was no one could have been. Well, I was shocked. I mean, I was really shocked that it actually worked, because I just didn't see that there was going to be a way to put these together in any kind of a flow at all. But I'm pleased that it turned out that way. Most people don't have a lot of time to read today. And so to be able to pick the book up, read a chapter, and not have to worry about forgetting where you left off 3 weeks earlier and come back and read it again, I think is a big help.
I agree.
Well, I want to get into the heart of the book. I am rather fascinated, to say the least. And following up on Patty's question, first of all, that when you did break it into sequence, you have Acts 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
And Act 1 is called The Cone Awaits, assessing your reality. And Act 2 is The Fires Come, sharpening your spiritual skills. And in Act 3, and I can see the connection, and Act 3 is The Mighty Sequoia Grows, fulfilling your promise. With that extra introduction I think we needed on it, you said something in this book that I don't recall any other author saying that I've interviewed, and it's probably happened, and I violated your recommendation. It says that you can read one chapter at a time, you should put it away and let a little time pass, and you can write another one. I didn't have that option. I had to do all of it this weekend, but even if you don't just read one chapter at a time, it still is the same kind of excitement. I think that my first question on the content has to do with your discussion that a sequoia tree is remarkable. You know, the seed may lie there for 50 years, and then it starts to grow, and it grows larger than other trees, certainly, and even when great fires come, the bark is so thick that they can survive. Now, your analogy that to human beings, from all your many experiences in your travel, and I don't want to misinterpret your book, but are you suggesting that most human beings have that same kind of durability during a lifetime, the comparison with the sequoia tree?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Most, I don't know if that's an accurate description or not. I do know that for those who do survive, there is a similar thickness, if you will, or a resistance to burning.
Survival.
Survival, yeah. And I mean, we're hardwired to survive. I mean, everything about our functioning of our body is around survival. So it's our mind that most often is the lagger around that.
I couldn't keep from thinking about the sequoia, because that's what the book's titled, and that is, everyone doesn't have the same breaks in life, and John Kennedy once said that life is not fair. So when the seeds are planted, or when people are born, some people, can I say this, that some people grow into being a sequoia and others don't make it into being a sequoia. They are a different kind of tree, or unfortunately some people don't get to survive a long life.
Yeah.
Were you thinking of that in relationship to the book?
Well, the title of the book came about because I recognized, first of all, I used to live in Southern California, and I would drive to Sequoia National Park to go camping and hiking. Right. And a park ranger one time told me about the sequoia tree, and I didn't really understand that from this little cone, it's about the size of a small chicken egg, from that cone, this giant tree can grow. And I looked at that and I thought, within this small, unassuming little thing is such huge potential. And I think for me, that's the metaphor for the human being, is regardless of what we grow into, whether it's a sequoia tree or a mulberry bush, whatever we grow into, there is a huge amount of potential lying within each one of us. And our job here walking the face of this earth is to discover what that potential is that we harbor and to find a way to get that to flourish.
Can one start out as a bush and through your advice and experiencing life become a sequoia?
Well, I think we reach different levels of recognizing the potential that we have. And Patty and I were talking about this a little earlier on. I think there's a lot of self-talk that goes on in us that says, I'm not a sequoia. I'm going to be a dandelion weed. Is about my stature in life. And I think that once we start to dig, I think we recognize that the potential that exists inside of each one of us is unlimited. It really is unlimited. What we do with it is where our limitations and what we end up growing into, that's kind of what defines that.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
Would you say that your book is an advice book Or would you say it's an inspirational book? Or would you say it's a little bit of both?
You know, I think the book is an autobiography more than anything else. I mean, it's not in the genre of that term, but I write when I find myself experiencing something that I believe is common to the human experience. When I see something or hear something or feel something that I know many, many other people have been there, done that. And I find that there's something in that experience that I have a revelation to. I don't know where it comes, to be really honest with you, but there's something about the experience that I can take what that is and I can turn that into words that someone may take as advice, or they just may take as my own personal experience.
But it's a sharing.
It's a sharing, very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Patty?
I would like to say that, you know, I don't think it's advice. I don't think it's how-to, but I would like to, I refer to it as a roadmap to self-discovery. So when I read it, that's the way I looked at it. I did identify with so many things in here. And so I feel like it's sort of a roadmap. And one of the nicest things that you can say to an author, and I'm saying it to you, is that you have touched on the human experience in here. There isn't a person, I don't believe, that isn't going to see either themselves or someone they love or a friend who, you know, I could buy out your entire print run and just distribute it, because I do believe you have touched on the common experiences. So
Thank you.
if you started out to do that, I don't know if you did or not, would you say that that was part of your purpose, was to help people?
The beginning of my e-zine, and that's kind of the seed that sprouted this, the beginning of my e-zine started when I worked for a corporation in California. And people had gone to one of my classes. I was a corporate trainer. They'd gone to a class that really was around how to live a more satisfying life, which was really odd for a corporation to do. It's usually how to be a better employee, but as a more satisfying life. And as a follow-up to that for people, I started writing weekly emails to them that just were points in time, a moment in time, to remember what's important in your life, remember your values, remember why you're here. And that's kind of where this all began. So I guess originally it started as a reminder to people to stay in touch with those things that are most meaningful in our lives. And from that, it grew into, you know, more. But it's not advice. And Patty, to be really honest with you, one of the problems I've got with being dubbed as a self-help book is that I'm not supposing that I can give anyone advice that will make their life better. But I can certainly ask questions that will lead them in the direction of their own answers. And that's what I've tried to do with this book, is to pose the questions to get them to answer their own questions.
I just want to get into the heart of this because
Okay.
I'm just fascinated with some content. And that is, what I got from reading about your experiences are really in here, about growing up in Washington, going to college, and as I introduced you, all these different things you've done, and the choices you've made are really major changes in your life. There's a lot of difference between teaching in middle school and advising corporations or being a reporter at a TV station. So you have really been an experimental person. And I saw that come back to this question is, in my lifetime, I've noticed that people are very different. Some people are very impulsive. And I've had some friends, when they get very upset about a particular job, they just quit and go do something else. Other people are very methodical and have a hard time making decisions, and they don't change. They stay at the same job, like some of us, for 36 years. And other people, say, I can only do something for so long. I had one student say to me, Tony, no one should do any job at 3 years and move on. The point, I'm a long, long dissertation, but what I'm getting at, people are very different. Yeah. So what I want to get at, though, is you have advice for them, I sense, without trying to say that everybody's going to do the same thing or be in the same mold. Talk a little bit about what you talked about in the book, about that some people don't maybe even realize their potential or don't have some new exciting adventures because of fear. And you quoted Franklin D. Roosevelt, who said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Even though you're saying that you're not trying to tell everybody this is a self-help book, but please speak to the issue of what you can say to people that maybe have the desire to do what you did, that is to launch out without a guarantee. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think fear is probably what drives more of our thought than anything else, and more of our behavior than anything else. And that is a major theme throughout this book, is facing and asking the question, is this true, when we're looking at our fears. The changes that I made in my own personal life, of quitting a job of 10 years and going out on my own or making different career shifts, were not done without fear. But the fear, I recognized, I didn't want fear to define my choices.
Okay.
I realized that I had seen people whose fear did define their choices, and they didn't particularly have a life they enjoyed.
And actually the roadblock from finding that life was the fear to try or to move out into something new.
Yeah.
One of the questions, and a lot of this I'll get into in next week's show about some of your own experiences, but another thing that came to mind was that as you've made some major changes in your life in this journey.
Yeah.
Very different, but very, very successful in each of them. After you did this once or twice, was it easier after that, after you'd been through an experience?
You would hope, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I thought you might say, I learned some techniques.
Yes, it was easier, but not in the way you would think.
Okay.
Because fear isn't part of our thinking brain, and we won't have to get into the physiology of the brain, although it fascinates me, but fear is not a part of our thinking brain. Fear is a part of our fight or flight brain. It's our limbic system. And no matter how many times you face something that you have a fear toward, you'll never intellectually remove that fear from your experience. So even though I did make shifts and changes every time I faced the same questions, it was the same things about, will I be able to do this? Do I have what it takes? But that recognition that that fear that's talking to me isn't real. The fear is just natural survival responses that we have to things that we're not sure about. By becoming aware of that, I can get back into my intellectual brain and recognize this isn't something that should be stopping me.
I would guess you did this too after having a couple of these and they were very successful. You say, but the next time it's probably not going to be successful.
Yeah.
It's not guaranteed because we've had these other successes.
Every time, yeah.
Janelle Burke.
Well, change is so much a part of our lives, so how do we balance change with our desire for constancies? And what kinds of things have to remain constant in our life?
Yeah.
What are those things? Certain things, truth has to remain constant.
Well, and we could talk truth a lot here.
What is truth? Ourself,
Yeah.
Keeping true to ourselves.
Yeah.
Are those things that are constants in our life that are balanced against the change?
Yes. When I was a corporate trainer, I did a lot of work within the organization around change, and as a business consultant, I did the same thing, because people respond to change with that fight or flight mechanism. They will go into a survival mechanism around what's going to happen, how's this going to affect me, can I deal with it? And I think that our world, unfortunately, has led most of us to believe that our security is something that we can find outside of ourselves. We can find it in a spouse, in a job, in a paycheck, in whatever it might be, that the security that we can feel internally is going to be based on something that we find externally. And that is just not true. So when you talk about what are the things that are constant, I think the things that are constant are those things that are internal to us. They are the belief systems that we have. They are the confidence that we have in ourselves. We are the anchor, if you will, in a sea of change, and we're not going to find it outside. That circumstances outside of us will always shift and change. And if we put our trust and faith in something outside of ourselves, we will most likely be disappointed.
Now, you have a chapter in the book entitled something about personal inventory.
Yes.
What do you mean by a personal inventory? And when did you take that personal inventory? When you were just a cone?
When I was a cone, yeah. Yeah, the flicker in my mother's eye, right? The personal inventories I actually wrote at the beginning of a year, kind of like where we are right now, when I recognize that this is the time where most people will stop and assess their lives. They'll go into, this year I'm going to change this or lose weight or stop smoking or whatever, and what happened this last year that I didn't want to have happen or hoped would that didn't have happen. So it's kind of an inventory stage, and I related it to businesses that go through inventory around what they have and what they don't have, what they've got too much of, what they need to reorder. And in looking at our own states of being, whether it's our attitudes or our physical health or our mental, outlook on things, we have habits that are our inventory. And the personal inventories is just kind of looking at, what is your personal inventory right now? What's overstocked? What isn't serving you any longer you need to toss out or donate to someone else? What is it that you are depleted in that you really do need to build up your reservoir or your reserves? So that's kind of what that chapter is about.
Thank you.
Patty Dickinson.
I'd like to ask you about this concept of self-talk, because what I got from your book is that most of our self-talk is negative. And I'm wondering why, how that came about, and why isn't some of our self-talk positive?
Yeah.
Or how can we change it? Or where does this concept of self-talk lie?
It's a really deep question too, Patty, and I'm not sure I have all the answer to that, because in my own experience of life and the people that I've spoken with, a lot of our self-talk is very negative. It is based in fear of, will I be able to do this? Who am I? Why should I deserve this? Our world, unfortunately, reinforces a lot of that. We hear a lot of negativity, whether it comes through the news or through rumors or whatever it might be, but we're fed a lot of negativity in our lives. And to kind of protect ourselves against that, we need to be conscious of the effect that it can actually have on us. Actually, if you study brain physiology, thoughts do change the chemistry of the brain and change the physiology of the brain, so that those negative thoughts can have a detrimental effect on our physiology to begin with.
Well, as a writer, and I am also a writer, that it's probably one of the most negative industries there is. The joke is to have enough rejections to paper your bathroom. And so in writing, did you have your negative thoughts with regard to, is this worthwhile?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You did that too.
Oh yeah, I did, which is one of the reasons that I didn't want to put it out to a publisher. I thought, well, I'll just self-publish it, which I didn't end up doing, but that was my original thought, was that I didn't want to go through that rejection, and I didn't want to go through that hard times. But I asked the question, I asked this of my editor when I was doing this, because I got to tell you, there's nothing in this book that is earth-shatteringly new. There really isn't. And as an author, I hate to say that, but what is in this book are experiences and revelations that I've had around those experiences that were enlightening to me and that I thought might be to other people. What she told me that helped me get over that, is this even worth writing? She said, Karen, every author has a reader. Mm-hmm. And whether they've heard it from 1,000 other people or not has nothing to do with how they'll hear it from you. And so that gave me a little bit of a, something to kind of sit on, was that, this book will find the people who they may have read, the Deepak Chopras of the world and the Wayne Dyers of the world and everyone else out there. They may have read them, but there will be something about this book for them that will get through, where something else might not have. So that was like a okay. I may have something to say that will get through to someone.
Good.
I want to follow up on Patty's question. That is, a person that I had a really brief encounter with, corresponding-wise, with our lecture series here was the late Norman Vincent Peale.
Mm.
And certainly that was a gentleman that taught positive thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And so your book really has some real great illustrations that we'll get into next week. But would you give another comment or two to our audience about, we've already talked about the physical. In fact, even with great tension and depression, it can create high blood pressure, ulcers, all medical doctors tell that. But what advice, in a brief time we have left, what can an individual do to try to come out of this negative thinking of themselves?
I think the one thing that I have found that works really well for most people is recognizing that it's normal. That the negative thoughts that we have running around in our heads all the time, everyone else does too. And we cover it up really well because it's not socially acceptable to say, I've got fearful thoughts running around in my head. But if we recognize that it's normal, number one. Number two, it's not something that you are consciously creating. Negative thoughts simply happen on a very unconscious level. So it's not something you're doing to yourself.
But isn't it also very helpful to be around people that are positive thinkers? One thing you talk about in the book is negative people can be very destructive for you.
Negative people can be very destructive for you. Positive people can help.
Okay.
But if you don't believe their positivity, then
you have to act upon it.
You have to act upon it. You have to actually believe that there is a different way of being.
Yes, well,
May I just ask something?
I wish you could, but I'll tell you the good news is you can ask it next week.
All right, I will.
What a great way to end our program.
I'm going to write it
I'll
down.
write it down, and our viewers, every one of them that are here today, will be back next week to hear Patty's question, I'm sure. Ladies and gentlemen, we very much enjoyed bringing you the program. We're talking about a book called The Sequoia Seed, and the author is Karen Wright, who's with us for 2 weeks. And we have a lot more to say about the book and the heart of the book. And there's some people that correspond with her that are in the book that we'll talk about next week, too. And Karen, thank you so much for being here. It's been a delight interviewing you, and we look forward to next week also.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, I hope you'll be with us again next week at the same time, and we'll continue our interview of Karen Wright on the book called The Sequoia Seed. It is a book, although she doesn't like to call it self-help, it does have a lot of information for you that can be extremely helpful, and I hope you'll be with us again next week at this same time, and we will continue this interview. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.